my name is Beck and I'm bringing some fantasy standalone recommendations today because I was asked on my Curious Cat for some and I realised that I haven't read too many, but I kind of gathered them up over a large breadth of time that I'd been reading and I managed to cherry pick a few. Most of them I've read and then about 3 at the end I haven't, but I wanted to mention those anyway. So let's get into the books that I've read first. Now please forgive me that I don't have a lot of these on hand with me. Because of the quarantine, I'm quarantining at my partner's house and my bookshelf obviously is at my parents' house. So because I'm quarantining here, I don't have a lot of my books physically on me, unfortunately. So I'd love to hold up a lot of books for you, but I'm just going to have to put images in. So hopefully that's not too much of a drama. The first book that I'm going to talk about is Uprooted by Naomi Novik. This book has very fairy tale vibes. It's about a small town living in the middle of a forest, and nearby there is a castle ruled by a magician called Dragon, or the Dragon, and every year he takes one girl from this town and takes them to the castle, and then the town never sees that girl again. And our main character thinks that her best friend is going to be taken, and she is terrified of her best friend leaving her, and then plot twist on the day, it turns out that the dragon doesn't take her best friend, she takes her instead. I really enjoyed the magic of this one. It was very deeply woven into the world building, which I really enjoyed, and the magic, the way it is conjured, is by heart and instinct, which I really liked. It let you delve deeply into character, which is something that I love seeing in a book anyway. I gave this one a 4 out of 5 stars, so I really enjoyed it, but I found that the middle to end of this book dragged just a little bit for me. So even though I'm very into slow burning books, I like the character, but this main character is not a teenager from memory. I think maybe she's older. So she's probably like 18, 19 years old rather than younger, at least from memory, because there is some explicit content in this book. Not very much, but I thought I'd put the warning there just in case for anyone who's a bit younger who ends up picking that book up. Similarly, Naomi Novik has also written another standalone fantasy, and this one I didn't love as much. I gave it a 2 out of 5 stars, I think, and it's Spinning Silver. This is also a fairy tale-esque story. It's actually based on the fairy tale of Rumpelstiltskin, and it's about a girl who is turning all the silver that she earns into gold. So her father is the moneylender of the village, but he's doing an absolutely terrible job, so she takes over and she starts to build a rapport with the town. Because of her name getting out there in the town, she attracts these mythical creatures called the Steric, and they are obsessed with gold, and so she is tasked to turn silver into gold or there's going to be a massive consequence. And I guess that is the premise of the book. It took a couple hundred pages to actually get into that premise, so I don't want to say too much more than that because it's a slow burning book like Uprooted was, and it'll be spoilery if I say too much more. But I didn't love this book as much as Uprooted. Her writing was fairly similar across both, but I think I just like the formula of Uprooted better than Spinning Silver. So those are the two by Naomi Novik that I'm going to talk about, and the rest of the books in this video are not by her, they're by other authors. So similarly to the first 2 books I talked about, the second 2 books I'm going to talk about are by the same author, and that is Brandon Sanderson. I had to include some Sanderson books in this video. Do you know me at all? The first one is Elantris and then the second one is Warbreaker. Yes, these two have sequels projected to be in the far future, but for now they are standalones and they definitely function that way. Sanderson doesn't have plans to revisit them for a little while. He's got a few projects to get to before Warbreaker and Elantris, so you are safe to consider them standalones for now. Elantris is about a mythical city, and it was super mythical until a few years ago when all of the magic started to die and nobody knows why, and now it's kind of dirty and linked to this curse, and people in the past used to be blessed, and when they had magic they became Elantrians and they went to this mythical city called Elantris. Now it's more the city that people get discarded to when they get touched by the Shroud. And in our opening chapters we are following a prince, and Prince Rowden gets touched by the Shroud and gets thrown into the city, so he's effectively exiled from his kingdom, and nobody is really told that he's turned into the Shroud, so it's got him trying to survive, and it's got a princess who is on her way to his kingdom who has had an arranged marriage with him and hasn't met him in person yet. So it's got more political intrigue than Warbreaker does, but it's a book that Sanderson started with. It's his first, essentially his first book that he wrote on his own after finishing the Wheel of Time series for Robert Jordan, and it's a really enjoyable book. It's got all of the makings of Sanderson's plots that he tightened later on in his work, but this is a really twisty-turny book with a lot of plot twists as well, and I don't want to get into too much of descriptor about what the magic system and the plot is, otherwise it will obviously give things away and I don't want to do that. So I'm just going to go into talking about Warbreaker now. So in short, Warbreaker is a story about 2 sisters who also happen to be princesses, and it has a magic system in it that is based on colour and breath. Every person has 1 breath, and I feel like every object has a breath as well that magic users can strip, and then that drains the colour from that object and it gives them more power. But I haven't read this book in a little while, so I don't want to say what the magic system system is down to a point, because there needs to be a little bit of room for movement, because my memory has probably forgotten certain things about the magic system. So the two sisters in here, the wrong one ended up getting married off to a political alliance, so it's the one that didn't have any of the political training. So while she gets married off, her name is Ciri, Viviana ends up having to go after her and try and track her sister down and effectively save her from her fate. I like how both sisters are very, very different, but they're very, very unique and strong in their own ways, and I like where they started compared to where they ended up. There's also an assassin-like figure in here as well, and he's got this really cool sword named Nightblood, and at the beginning of the book you get an understanding of the magic system based on seeing some of what Vasha is doing, and Sanderson is really good at doing that, at really rooting you into the magic system that he's trying to paint a picture of. He really sells it to you through a character exploring it and using it, and then later on a character learning it. So you get both perspectives and you understand the breadth of the world as well as the characters who are very much in that world, which is what I really enjoy about his work. So much so that the next book is actually also a Sanderson book, but it's more of a lesser known book by him, and it's Therithmatist. And this is a middle grade book, so it's very different from his adult work. Obviously the writing and the tone is different and the characterization is very different as well, but it still has a fairly complicated magic system. So in here we follow a character named Joel, and I think his mother is a cleaner at this academy, and the academy is what Joel wants to study at most of all, because that is where you learn how to be a Rithmatist. And Rithmatists are basically like young magicians that are trained in chalk magics and chalk drawings in order to summon magic. And there is also a war going on at a far off place that involves chalklings, which are the creatures that you can summon, and there are wild versions of these chalklings that have no master and no control. So you've got a few moving parts in this book. You've got Joel who wants to learn magic, you've got the academy and the people who are trained at it, and then the soldiers fighting this far off war, and you've also got the wild chalklings, and that all culminates and links together when there starts to be people going missing or potentially being killed, and someone suspects wild chalklings, but they need to be directed in order to do damage. So you don't know who is behind this murder mystery, and that is what Joel is trying to find out. Like Sanderson's other works, which I just mentioned, this also has projected to be a sequel, but it is a little bit far off, so I'm pretty safe at the moment to recommend this as a standalone. But I mean, go ahead and check out his website, he's got all of his works listed. So if there are any updates about this sequel coming out or the following sequels coming out, it'll all be on his website. He does an awesome newsletter that is like the state of Sanderson, a wrap up pretty much yearly about where all his writing is at. So that's how I kind of keep up to date on his work. But this one doesn't seem like it's going to have a sequel anytime soon, even though he's holding himself very accountable and mentioning it every year in his State of Sanderson. He has not forgotten about it, but at the moment it is a standalone. So next up I'm going to recommend Nimona by Noelle Stevenson, and this follows a mischievous shapeshifting character named Nimona, and she ends up teaming up with a supervillain and they both start wreaking havoc and making mischief, and it's just a very sweet and fun and silly graphic novel, but it has a lot of heart and I really, really enjoyed it. I think I gave this a 4 or 5 stars when I read it actually. It was just really sweet and really fun, so if you're looking for something that's really quick to read, I read this in like under an hour, so it's a perfect book to pick up if you're doing a readathon or if you just want something to slot really quickly into your Goodreads reading challenge. And Neil Gaiman is an author that I really want to mention as well, even though for some reason I just can't seem to connect very well with his fiction work. I'm yet to try his non-fiction, but I wanted to mention him because I have read some of his work and he does do a lot of standalones in general, especially fantasy themed, and he writes about a lot of fae and fairy creatures as well, so it is relevant to this topic that I'm talking about, but I don't necessarily love him, but someone else might end up loving him. So that is why I'm going to include Stardust on this list. So Stardust is about a boy named Tristan Thorne, and he is a young farm boy and he's basically fallen head over heels in love for this girl, but this girl doesn't really reciprocate these feelings, so she gives him a quest as a challenge to prove his love to her, and she sees a falling star one night and tasks him with the quest to go and find this falling star and bring it back to her, thinking that this quest is basically impossible, but he goes into the Fey woods and does it anyway, and this star ends up not being just a star, it ends up being a Fey kind of star creature, and the story unfolds from there in a very whimsical manner, which is not really my cup of tea. I don't think I really like reading about Fae or Fae folk or whimsical writing. I don't know what it is. I think Uprooted by Naomi Novik had more of a plot to it, so I enjoyed that more. I don't know, maybe I just like that formula better, but for some reason Stardust didn't really gel with me, so I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars, but I know a lot of people love Neil Gaiman and there is definitely a reason why. He's just not my cup of tea personally. Also, Stardust is a novella, so again it is quite short and it is quite quick to read, so if you're wanting something else that's also fast for your Goodreads challenge, Stardust is probably one to pick up. Again, the next 2 books are by the same author, and I'm going to recommend The Song of Achilles and Cersei by Madeline Miller. Both of these I've also read, and and they are retellings of Greek myths. I'm not sure if they're necessarily directly considered fantasy. Because they feature gods and magic and mythological things, I'm including them anyway because I feel like they're relevant to a certain degree, so that's why they're on this list. And Cersei is about the character named Cersei. Cersei is a witch, and Zeus is intimidated and fearful of her witchcraft, so he ends up banishing her to this basically deserted island. And Cersei accidentally draws the wrath of gods and monsters alike because she is on this island honing her witchcraft, and she gets visited by mortal people quite a lot. Just by accident really, because they wash up on her shores. Obviously the story is born out of the encounters that she gets with these mortals, so I don't want to say who washes up when and why, but that is the general gist of the story. And now let's get into Song of Achilles. I didn't love Cersei, but I preferred the Song of Achilles just because I liked the formula of the Song of Achilles more, but I do really like the story of Cersei and her magic. I found that really unique and interesting. Editing back here, I'm about to say Achilles and Patroclus in my description of the plot summary, but I got their names mixed around, so everything else I say is correct, but just switch the names around and that is what I meant to say. This is what happens when you don't look up a synopsis before you film a video. So the Song of Achilles follows Achilles, who is at a young age banished from his kingdom and into a neighbouring kingdom where he runs into the king's perfect son named Patroclus, and the story revolves around both of these two boys as they grow up and become proficient in fighting and they go to war together. And it is definitely a love story between both of them, so it's kind of like a tragic love story, and I gave the Song of Achilles a 4 out of 5 stars, whereas I gave Cersei a 3. So if you're going to read those, I know Song of Achilles was published first, but I'd recommend reading Cersei first and then continuing on with the Song of Achilles if you're going to tackle her books that way. Okay, the next one may seem pretty big, but I know for a fact that it is about the same page length as Queen of Shadows, and tons of people have read the Throne of Glass series at least up until that point, so I'm going to recommend Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. This isn't a final copy, it's an advanced copy, so it doesn't have the final cover, but I found the writing actually really digestible. It was detailed, as you should come to expect with Samantha Shannon, because she does a lot of research and puts a lot of effort into her work, and I definitely found that with the two types of dragons we see in here, the fire and water dragons. The basic premise of this book is something that I'm going to have to read out because every time I try and do it from memory I get it wrong. So it is a world divided, a queendom without an heir, and an ancient enemy awakens, and this is a multiple perspective fantasy book. I don't want to talk about this too much because I fear that I'll give things away, and it is all in one book, so all of the questions that you have at the start will be answered, but the two characters that mainly stand out to me from memory are Tane, and she is a girl who is trying to become a dragon rider, and there's also Iad, and she belongs to a secret society of mages, but she has been tasked with protecting royalty, so she is secretly masquerading in court and is surrounded by politics that she's unfamiliar with. So those are the two characters that I kind of want to leave you with, because that's all you necessarily need to pique your interest about this book. And yes, it does look long, it does look scary, but there are plenty of books that are a lot longer than this one. It only looks fat because it's probably so tall actually, so please read this, it was a lot of fun. So now we're getting into the final 2 books that I have read before I talk about the 3 books that are also standalones but I haven't read. So the next book that I want to talk about is another Brandon Sanderson book, I know, but it is The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson, and yes, this is the first book in his Mistborn trilogy, so it's technically part of a series, but also because it's got a complete story arc in it, you can read it as a standalone, and it's actually a really nice way to figure out whether you enjoy Brandon Sanderson's writing, because if you do, obviously you can continue on and read his Mistborn trilogy. The Final Empire is basically a heist set in a high fantasy world, and it is adult fantasy even though we follow a young protagonist. So we follow Vin, and she's 16. She is a street urchin and she gets picked up by Kelsia, and Kelsia is basically the leader of this rebellion. So he's trying to gather people together who are Mistings and Mistborns, which are the magic users in this world, and overthrow the Lord Ruler. So the Lord Ruler took over many years ago, and everyone is forced under his regime, so they want to overthrow him and bring more freedom back to the land and the people. So that's what this book essentially follows, and they are trying to kill the Lord Ruler. So Vin actually has this magical ability that I talked about before. She is either a Misting or a Mistborn, and that means that she can consume metals and then burn them in her stomach, and she has the capacity and control over metals. So it may sound weird and confusing. I know it was weird to me before I'd picked up Mistborn, but now I am 100% behind it. I loved the magic system system in here. So if you can pick up The Final Empire, it does explain all of the magic system. Some people have said it's like an info dump, but it's through Vin learning the magic system, so I didn't find it info dumpy at all. And I'm really grateful to the detail that Brandon Sanderson put into The Final Empire, and especially in his magic system, because that has so much of a ripple effect later if you really want to continue reading. So the magic system is detailed, yes, but Brandon's writing is, I want to say simple, and I don't mean that as an insult. I mean that as in, if you want to start reading adult fantasy, this is a perfect place to start, because he doesn't overwrite things and he doesn't hide things in the prose that you're likely to miss just because it's so flowery and it's so purple. The Final Empire is on my list for that reason. It's definitely one of my favorites, and I just want everyone to read Brandon Sanderson. I don't know if that's been made clear from my other videos. Next, I want to talk about Kings of the Wild by TIIIIIIME, and this is a book that I only read this year, and it is an adult book as well, and the main character in here is named Clay, and he is an adult, so it's a bit different to what Mistborn would be like, because it follows an older character who is definitely an adult, rather than a book written in an adult way about a younger character. So you get to connect with Clay's voice, and he's very sardonic and sarcastic, and I really like him for that reason. It follows Clay, who is one of in the past, a famous band of mercenaries. So now that he's a lot older, he's got a wife, he's got a child, he's got a family really. So do all of his friends. But one of his friends, Gabe, has had his daughter kidnapped. So now Gabe is going around to try and reunite them all so they can go and rescue her. So it's very much a getting a band back together and going on a quest story. So it's very traditional fantasy in that sense, but it's written in a very contemporary and modern way. And I think that's why so many people have the potential to enjoy it now, because it does have a throwback to the older fantasy, but it has it in a more self-aware way in here, and I really like Clay's voice for that reason, and I really like the inclusivity of magical creatures, because I feel like I read a lot of fantasy that has magic in it, but I don't read a lot of fantasy that has magical creatures and goblins and dragons and stuff. So this is one that definitely has all of those cool things in it, and because of the inclusion of those creatures, sometimes when they appeared in the narrative, I had no idea what was going to happen next, because they made it unpredictable, and I really enjoyed that about it. So that's why I'm going to recommend this book, because I think a lot more people should get on board and read it. It does have technically a sequel called Bloody Rose, so it doesn't follow the same characters necessarily in that book, but it does mention them. So you'll definitely benefit from reading this and then reading Bloody Rose. But if you just want to read this, it has a complete story arc in it, like The Final Empire did. So if you don't want to read Bloody Rose and you just want a standalone fantasy, you can read this one. It starts in this book, it ends in this book. All the characters are excellent. There is so much great banter and sarcasm in here. So if you want something that's quite sarcastic and a little bit more adult and has magical creatures in it and is more traditional fantasy that doesn't follow a younger character, this is probably the book that you're looking for. So now on to 3 books that I haven't read, because I just wanted to throw a few more in here. This video felt fairly sparse. The first one is The Golem and the Genie, and I know that this follows a love story for a golem who falls in love with a genie. That is literally all I know, and I started reading it in a try a chapter tag ages and ages ago, and I decided that at the time it wasn't for me and I unhauled it, but I know that it has more of a slower burn writing, so if you're looking for something that's slow burn, potentially romancy, then probably go with The Golem and the Genie. Personally, it probably wouldn't be for me, which is obviously why I unhauled it, but because it has fantastical elements in it, I thought that I would mention it here as well. And then another one that I wasn't sure whether I should mention, but it does have like magical creatures in it, and it does have sword fights and cool stuff in it, is The Princess Bride. I haven't read this, but I've seen the film and I adore the film. This follows Princess Buttercup, who is betrothed to Prince Humperdinck, I think his name is, which is ridiculous. And he turns out not to be the dazzling prince that she thought, and enter the farm boy Wesley, who I think grew up or at least participated in Buttercup's farm when she was a bit younger, and they formed a connection then, but then he went away and now he's back. So obviously he is the love interest and he is her true love, and it's about him trying to save the princess. That is all I know really, just judging by the movie, if the movie is fairly similar to the book, which is what I've heard. And because I love the film so much, I'm anticipating that I'll enjoy the book as well. And then the last one that I have not read is A Skinful of Shadows, and this is by Frances Harding. I have not heard anything about this, but I bought it a few years ago and I'm determined to read it because first of all, the cover is beautiful, and second of all, it's a fantasy that is fairly underrated, so I'd like to read it and see what I think of it. I reread the synopsis before I filmed this video, so I have a little bit of it here and it really intrigued me, so I might just read it out to you now. 12-year-old Makepeace has learned to defend herself from the ghosts which try to possess her in the knight, desperate for refuge, but one day a dreadful event causes her to drop her guard, and now there's a spirit inside her. How cool does that sound? I believe it's set in a fantasy world as well, and it seems like our main character is sent off to live with her father during the time of a war going on in this fantasy world. So it sounds incredible, to be honest. I don't know why I haven't picked it up and why I've let it lapse for so long on my to-be read pile, but that is all I've got. Fantasy standalones, in retrospect, are really hard to discover, at least from what I've found, so if you have any that you'd like to recommend below, please do, because I'm always on the hunt for more, and I feel like I've dropped the ball on this, so I'd like to find more if I can. Don't forget that I've got a curious cat, which I'll link down in the description. That is how I got this video suggestion, so thank you for asking. But thank you so much for watching this video. I will chat to you in the comments, and I will catch you in my next one. Bye.